In the morning, a woman walked into work with a wild bobcat right behind her. The entire office froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Until something unforgettable unfolded. Stay with me till the very end, because this story will leave you stunned. And before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this. In the comments, write this affirmation: I attract incredible stories and lessons into my life. For years, mornings at the Ridgewood Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had followed the same familiar rhythm. Staff arrived just after sunrise, the air still cool and sharp, dew glistening on the grass. The building itself, a modest structure tucked at the edge of the forest, usually echoed with little more than the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional call of a bird recovering in the aviary. For Emily Carter, those mornings were a kind of sanctuary, a steady beginning to days that could otherwise be unpredictable. She'd been working at the center for nearly 15 years, and even though emergencies often arrived without warning, the ritual of arriving early, sipping her thermos of coffee, and watching the mist roll over the pine-covered hills always calmed her. But that particular Tuesday morning was different. From the moment Emily turned into the gravel driveway, she felt an edge in the air, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The sun had barely begun to rise, painting the horizon with streaks of pink and gold, and the quiet seemed almost unnatural. Normally, she would see rabbits darting across the road, or hear the chatter of squirrels among the trees, but this morning the woods stood silent, heavy, and expectant. She parked her battered Jeep in its usual spot near the dumpster and reached over to gather her work bag. That's when she noticed it, a flicker of movement at the edge of her vision. At first, Emily assumed it was a raccoon rummaging for scraps. But when she turned her head fully, the sight that met her eyes made her blood run cold. A large, tawny shape slipped from behind the dumpster, shoulders rolling with the unmistakable grace of a predator. It was a bobcat. For a heartbeat, Emily froze, unsure if her mind was playing tricks in the half-light. But there was no mistaking it. The animal's tufted ears flicked forward, its amber eyes scanning the lot with sharp intensity. Instead of slinking back into the forest as most wild cats would at the sight of a human, this one lingered, pacing in short, restless strides. Its muscles rippled beneath its spotted coat, tail twitching with agitation. Emily's training and instincts clashed in that moment. Everything she knew told her that bobcats avoided humans, that this animal should have vanished the instant she stepped out of her car. Yet it didn't. Instead, the cat paused, lifted its nose to the air, and then locked eyes with her. The connection was electric, startling, as though she had been caught in a spotlight. Inside the building, just beyond the glass entrance doors, Emily saw movement. Meredith, the young receptionist, had been sitting at her desk when she looked up and noticed what was happening. Her head jerked up, eyes widening in disbelief. She pressed a hand to her mouth, but made no sound. Slowly, others began to gather in the doorway: Dr. Alvarez from the Raptor program, Jake the maintenance assistant, and even Martha, who had arrived early to feed the recovering owls. One by one, their faces appeared, frozen in the glow of the morning sun, their bodies perfectly still as they realized what was happening outside. The entire office seemed to stop breathing. Emily's own breath came shallow and quick, but something in her years of experience steadied her. This wasn't random. The cat wasn't here by accident. Its movements weren't the cautious testing of a curious predator. They were purposeful, deliberate. It paced one way, paused, then paced back, always glancing toward her with that piercing gaze. The memory of the two rescued bobcat cubs flashed in Emily's mind. Just 3 days earlier, they'd been discovered curled up behind some old feed sacks in the center's supply shed, mewing pitifully. The staff had assumed they'd been abandoned. But now, standing here in the parking lot, Emily began to understand the truth. This wasn't a chance. This was their mother. The realization struck her like a blow to the chest. No wonder the animal hadn't retreated. No wonder it carried itself with such restless desperation. It wasn't here to hunt or to threaten. It was here because something it loved had been taken away. Still, none of that changed the danger of the moment. Emily knew very well that bringing a wild predator near people was a recipe for disaster. All it would take was one startled movement, one panicked scream, and the bobcat's instincts could take over in ways no one could control. She felt the weight of dozens of unseen eyes on her, colleagues holding their breath behind the glass, waiting to see what she would do. Her hand tightened around the strap of her bag, and she thought of the old blanket she'd stuffed inside the night they'd brought the kittens in. She'd used it to cradle the smaller one, wrapping it gently to stop its trembling. She hadn't washed it yet, and it still carried their scent. Could that be the key? Could she bridge the impossible gap between human and wild mother with nothing more than fabric and instinct? The bobcat paused again, tail twitching, ears alert. Emily slowly opened her car door wider, every motion careful and deliberate, as though she were walking a tightrope. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she did not let fear show on her face. Instead, she kept her eyes soft, her breathing steady, and her posture calm. She had learned long ago that animals could sense the storm inside a person, and right now, the last thing she could afford was panic. Behind the glass, Meredith pressed her hands against the door, eyes huge. Someone whispered something. Emily couldn't hear the words, but she felt the tension building. Everyone was on edge, ready to run, but frozen by the spectacle of what was unfolding before them. The ordinary rhythm of a normal morning had been shattered completely. The parking lot that usually echoed with the shuffle of feet and clink of coffee mugs now held a scene no one would ever forget. One woman, standing utterly still, and a wild bobcat staring back at her, just steps away. What Emily did next would decide everything. Emily stood in the gravel lot with her pulse thundering in her ears. Every second felt stretched, as if time itself had slowed to watch what she would do. The bobcat still paced, her tufted ears swiveling, her tail flicking with anxious energy. She wasn't advancing aggressively, but she wasn't leaving either. That told Emily one thing. This animal had a reason to stay. The reason tugged at Emily's mind like an invisible thread, the two cubs inside the building. Her breath caught when she remembered the way those tiny kittens had pressed themselves into the blanket 3 nights ago, their cries raw with confusion. The memory merged with the sight of this frantic mother, and suddenly the situation made terrifying sense. This wasn't a random encounter. The mother had tracked her cubs here, following their scent, driven by the instinct stronger than fear, maternal bond. Emily swallowed hard. Everything in her training told her to keep distance, to call for backup, to never lure a wild predator into human space. Yet another voice whispered in her chest, the voice that had guided her through rescues countless times before. If she turned the mother away now, the cubs might never return to the wild as a family. Without her, they'd grow up in captivity, forever cut off from the lessons only she could teach. And if the mother lost hope, she might not survive her own grief. Her hand shook as she reached into her bag. The coarse fabric of the old flannel blanket brushed against her fingers. It was the same one she'd used to wrap the smaller cub, the one that had trembled so violently when separated from its sibling. She'd meant to wash it, but exhaustion had left it crumpled at the bottom of her bag. Now, that forgetfulness felt like fate. Slowly, Emily pulled the blanket free and lifted it into the air so the breeze could carry the scent. The effect was immediate. The bobcat froze mid-step, her head snapping up, nostrils flaring. Her golden eyes locked onto Emily's hand as if the fabric itself glowed. Then came the sound, a soft, urgent chirping call. It was the same sound the kittens had made in their cage, only deeper, fuller, aching with longing. Emily's throat tightened. This was the moment of choice. She took a careful step backward, her movements slow enough for the animal to follow. The gravel crunched beneath her shoe, and the bobcat mirrored her step. The distance between them remained constant, 15 feet, no more, no less, as though an invisible tether bound them together. From behind the glass, Meredith's face appeared again, pale and stunned. Emily knew they were all watching, torn between rushing to help and staying frozen in awe. With one hand, she fumbled her phone from her pocket, typing a quick message to the staff group chat. "Do not panic. I'm bringing in the cub's mother. Clear the hallway to quarantine room 3. Stay calm." She hit send and slipped the phone back into her pocket, her eyes never leaving the bobcat. Step by step, she retreated toward the building. Each motion felt like a gamble. If the animal lost trust, if the distance closed too quickly, if anyone inside panicked and screamed, the fragile calm would shatter. But the mother kept following, her focus pinned on the blanket. Emily's chest tightened with the weight of what she was doing. She was about to lead a wild predator into a building full of people. Every regulation she'd ever memorized screamed at her to stop. The center was meant for rehabilitation, yes, but never under circumstances like this. This was crossing a line no manual had ever prepared her for. And yet, deep down, she knew it was the only way. She could not turn this mother away. Not when her cubs cried for her just yards away. The glass doors loomed ahead, reflecting the pale morning light. Emily's breath grew shallow. This was the true point of no return. Would the bobcat step through? Or would instinct win, sending her bolting back into the wilderness? Emily tightened her grip on the blanket, took one more step back, and whispered, as if the animal could understand. "Come on, Mama. Your babies are waiting." The lobby of the Ridgewood Wildlife Center had never been so silent. Emily could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above her, the faint rustle of papers left on the front desk, and, most of all, the soft pads of the bobcat's paws against the linoleum floor. Each sound felt amplified, as though the building itself was holding its breath. Behind doorways, faces peeked out. Meredith had retreated several feet from the front desk, her phone trembling in her hands. Jake, usually loud and carefree, now stood rigid in the maintenance hallway, his wide eyes fixed on the wild animal pacing behind Emily. Even Dr. Alvarez, who prided himself on calm under pressure, gripped the doorframe so tightly his knuckles went white. No one dared to speak. The bobcat moved slowly, her body taut with conflict. Her instincts told her this place was dangerous. Strange smells, narrow hallways, human voices. Yet another instinct, stronger, unyielding, pulled her forward. She had smelled her kittens. And then, like a faint bell carried on the wind, came the sound. A soft, high-pitched mew, muffled through the door at the far end of the hallway. The kittens, pressed against the enclosure wall, had caught her scent. Their cries grew louder, urgent, desperate. The bobcat froze mid-step, ears pricking forward, tail stiff. The sound cut through every ounce of fear, every survival instinct. A low, quivering chirp escaped her throat, an unmistakable call of recognition. Emily's heart lurched. She glanced at the final door, the one marked Quarantine Room 3. Just a few more steps. Just one more decision. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. She knew what she was about to risk. If the bobcat panicked, the hallway could turn chaotic in an instant. There would be no controlling her. Still, Emily pressed forward. The handle clicked, and she pushed the door open. What happened next would stay in the memory of everyone who witnessed it, burned into their minds as one of the most extraordinary moments they would ever see. The kittens shrieked with recognition, their tiny bodies launching forward in a blur of spotted fur. Their mews rose in a chorus, desperate and joyous. The mother bobcat let out a sound that startled even Emily, a strange, trembling noise that was neither a growl nor a purr, but something rawer, more vulnerable, as if relief itself had found a voice. She bounded into the room, and the reunion exploded with unrestrained chaos. The cubs tumbled over each other, clawing their way onto her back, pressing their little faces into her chest. The mother collapsed onto her side, pulling them close with her forelegs, licking them frantically, as though trying to convince herself they were real. Her rough tongue rasped over their fur again and again, punctuated by soft whimpers and urgent chirps. Emily felt her own eyes sting. She blinked, but the tears spilled anyway. And she wasn't the only one. Meredith, phone still in hand, let out a sob she didn't bother to hide. Jake lowered his head, wiping his sleeve across his face. Even Dr. Alvarez, the veteran of countless rescues, had gone suspiciously quiet, his gaze fixed on the trembling knot of fur. For several minutes, no one moved. The room was filled with sounds so primal, so universal, they cut through every barrier between human and animal. The cries of children reunited with their mother, the soothing murmurs of comfort, the desperate relief of finding what was lost. It was messy. It was loud. It was utterly beautiful. Emily leaned against the wall, her hand pressed against her chest as if to steady her racing heart. This was what she had risked everything for, the chance to give this wild family back to each other. And seeing it unfold before her, she knew without doubt it had been worth it. At last, the bobcat lifted her head. Her golden eyes scanned the room, sharp yet softened by the relief of reunion. For a heartbeat, her gaze met Emily's. It wasn't gratitude, not in the way humans think of it, but there was recognition, an acknowledgement. as though the mother knew Emily had been the bridge between despair and hope. Dr. Alvarez cleared his throat softly, his voice husky. "Well," he said, almost to himself, "I think we know what we have to do." And with that, the decision that would shape the rest of the day began to form. A decision that would not only change the lives of this Bobcat family, but also leave an indelible mark on everyone who had stood frozen in that hallway, bearing witness to a moment where instinct, risk, and compassion collided in the most extraordinary way. The hours that followed the reunion were a blur of controlled chaos, but beneath it all ran a steady current of awe. Everyone at the Ridgewood Wildlife Center understood instinctively. Keeping the Bobcat family confined was not an option. They had come together against all odds, and now it was the staff's responsibility to return them to the wild where they belonged. Emily stood at the edge of the quarantine room, still shaken from what she had witnessed. The mother Bobcat lay curled in the corner, both cubs pressed tightly against her sides, nursing and climbing and rubbing against her fur as if they feared she might vanish again. She licked them with relentless urgency, never letting her gaze stray far. The bond was undeniable, fierce, and unbreakable. Dr. Alvarez broke the silence first. "We released them today," he said firmly. His words carried the weight of decades of experience. "The sooner they're back in their territory, the better their chances." No one disagreed. Plans snapped into motion. Jake and his maintenance crew prepped the transport carrier, lining it with fresh bedding and securing the latches. Meredith, her face still blotchy from crying, coordinated with state wildlife officials to expedite the release paperwork. Martha dashed between offices, gathering supplies. Even the volunteers, usually relegated to smaller tasks, pitched in with quiet determination. The atmosphere buzzed with urgency, but also with something more, something reverent. For Emily, each step felt surreal. Hours earlier, she had feared that luring the Bobcat inside might end in disaster. Now, watching the family reunited and healthy, she felt a quiet certainty. She had made the right choice. Still, her heart remained heavy with responsibility. Leading them back into the forest wasn't just a logistical task. It was a promise to honor the trust that had been forged in that hallway. By noon, everything was ready. The family had been transferred into the large carrier with surprising ease. The mother Bobcat, exhausted but calm, did not resist as long as her kittens remained within sight. Their soft mews seemed to soothe her, and her eyes, though wary, no longer burned with the same frantic desperation as that morning. The convoy formed quickly, Emily in the lead van with Dr. Alvarez, Meredith and Martha following in a second vehicle, and Jake insisting on driving his own truck just in case. They wound their way up the narrow Forest Service road, climbing higher into the ridges where autumn leaves painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. When they finally stopped, the air was crisp and fragrant with pine. Sunlight filtered through the branches, dappling the forest floor in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The chosen spot lay near a natural spring, where water trickled gently through mossy rocks and game trails wove into the distance. It was wild, quiet, and perfect. Emily's hands trembled as she knelt beside the carrier. She could hear the cubs inside, chirping softly, and the low rumble of their mother's breath. She glanced at Dr. Alvarez, who gave a small nod. "Go on," he murmured. "This is yours to do." With deliberate care, Emily unlatched the door. For a moment, nothing happened. The Bobcat's golden eyes gleamed from the shadows inside, unblinking, waiting. Then, in a fluid motion, she stepped out. Her paws sank into the soft earth, claws flexing as if testing the ground. She turned her head once, sniffing the air, before letting out a low chirp. The cubs tumbled after her in a rush of spotted fur, clumsy and eager. They pressed themselves against her legs, tails flicking, their small bodies quivering with excitement. The mother bent down to nuzzle them, then lifted her head to survey the forest. And then it happened. She turned back. Her golden eyes met Emily's across the clearing, steady and piercing. It lasted only a heartbeat, but in that brief connection, Emily felt something profound. It wasn't human gratitude, not in words or emotions she could name, but something rawer, older. An acknowledgement. A recognition between two mothers who had both made impossible choices for the sake of their young. Then, with a final flick of her tail, the Bobcat turned and melted into the trees. The cubs bounded after her, their small paws stirring the fallen leaves until their spotted coats vanished into the dappled shadows. The forest swallowed them whole, as if they had never been there at all. Silence fell over the clearing. No one moved. For a long moment, the group simply stood, staring at the place where the family had disappeared. It felt less like an end and more like a beginning. Meredith broke the stillness with a whisper. "Do you think they'll make it?" Dr. Alvarez exhaled, his voice gruff but steady. "They have each other. That gives them the best chance of all." Emily stayed kneeling by the empty carrier, her heart swelling and aching all at once. She thought of the terror in the parking lot, the impossible risk of leading a predator into the building, the breathtaking chaos of reunion. Every second had been worth it for this moment. The sight of a family restored, wild and free where they belonged. The drive back was quiet, but word spread quickly. By the time they returned to the center, security footage from the morning had already been clipped and shared. Within days, it would go viral, sparking conversations about wildlife rehabilitation, maternal instinct, and the extraordinary things that happen when compassion outweighs fear. For the Ridgewood staff, though, the story lived deeper than headlines. It became a touchstone, a legend retold to new volunteers, a reminder whispered in the break room whenever morale faltered. And for Emily, it remained something far more personal. Weeks later, on a misty morning, she returned to the same parking lot where it had all begun. The world looked ordinary again, cars in their spots, birdsong in the trees. But near the forest edge, she noticed faint tracks in the soft earth. One large, two small, moving north together. She smiled, her chest warming. Maybe it was them, maybe not. She chose to believe it was, because in her heart, she knew some stories don't end when the door closes or the forest swallows the figures whole. Some stories live on, retold, remembered, shaping the way people see the world. And the story of the bobcat who walked into an office to reclaim her young would live forever, not just as a legend of Ridgewood, but as proof that even in the wildest places, love knows no boundaries.